This is New Zealand, a remote island country. Its two main land masses are the North Island and the South Island. And right here, between these two pieces of land, lies the Cook Strait. And you know what? It's a paradox of a place. Let's take a closer look. Grab a ruler and estimate the gap between the North and South Islands. It's only about 14 miles. You'd think boats would be constantly zipping across, but nope, the reality is a lot more complicated. The Cook Strait is one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the planet. Those tiny 14 miles aren't a joke. They're a factory churning out problems. Look, two bodies of ocean meet here, and together they create something like hell? That's honestly the best word for it. No sane boater wants to risk it because of the waves, the wind, and the brutal currents. But if it's just the ocean being the ocean and its moods are at least understandable, then you'd think we could build some kind of bridge here. Nope. New Zealand has another surprise. The land around the Cook Strait formed in a way that won't tolerate any stable, immovable structure. So what's actually going on in the Cook Strait, and why can't New Zealand do anything about it? Today you'll find out. So there are waves in the Cook Strait. Big deal. Who'd be surprised? I wouldn't be. But then I found out something weird is going on with them there. Look, here's our Cook Strait. On one side, you've got the Tasman Sea, and on the other, the Pacific Ocean. Wave energy builds up out there, and then it pushes in from both sides into this narrow gap. And then, bam! The average wave in the strait is about 6.5 feet. Not a big deal. But hold on, that's in a calm sea. Very often, this place goes completely feral. They've recorded waves up to about 46 feet high. A 4-story building charging straight at your boat. Not a fun scenario. Especially when you remember that the Cook Strait is unique for another reason too. Here's what can happen. A tide is rising in the Pacific, while at the very same time, the tide is falling in the Tasman Sea. On opposite sides of a narrow strait, the water level ends up different, like a gigantic water slide tilted from one side to the other. But water can't stay tilted, so gravity forces it to surge toward the lower level to balance things out. So in the end, every second, Cook Strait moves a volume of water comparable to what hundreds of the world's biggest rivers combined would carry. And if that doesn't mean much, here's another way to put it. If you could harness all that chaos, you could power the entire country. And yes, in the Cook Strait, you can watch this kind of madness happening constantly, because the seafloor of Cook Strait is a nasty piece of work. Look, over here it can be surprisingly shallow, and then suddenly the bottom drops away to around 3,300 feet. Then it rises again, and there's a canyon and another dip. When a fast-moving current slams into terrain like that, the water can literally shoot up toward the surface. From a distance, it looks like the sea is boiling, even when there's barely any wind. The boat doesn't just roll, it gets shoved upward from below, like something's punching the hole from the deep. Invisible columns of water knock you off course. The rudder stops responding, and steering turns into a fight with something you can't even see. And here's the catch. The indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori, somehow managed to travel across the strait. And they didn't have engines, radar, or weather forecasts on a phone. The Maori were extraordinary navigators. They could read the currents, the wind, and the stars. They crossed oceans in canoes, guided by nature. But even they feared and respected the Cook Strait. Before a crossing, they would blindfold those who didn't have experience, then carry them onto shore. They weren't allowed to touch the strait's water, and it wasn't only about the waves. The wind here behaves like it's constantly being challenged. According to captains and meteorologists, Cook Strait gets storm-force winds about 25 times a year, basically every couple of weeks. In other words, conditions regularly become the kind where a fully safe passage is basically off the table. But why here, over this narrow stretch? There's tons of open space all around. The answer is simple. That's just how our planet works. New Zealand sits right in the path of the southern hemisphere's most powerful winds. They circle Antarctica for years, barely touching land. They accelerate, gaining strength, and nothing slows them down. And then bam, the New Zealand Alps block their way. Mountains are a natural wall. Air doesn't pass through them, and it doesn't rush to climb over them either. So it starts looking for a way around. And where's the gap? Right, the Cook Strait, a narrow corridor between the islands only about 14 miles wide. That's where the winds funnel, and then the wind tunnel effect kicks in. Huge volumes of air get squeezed through that tight passage and accelerate to speeds that seem unreal out in the open ocean. But that's not even the whole story. We haven't even added waves to the equation. Put it all together and it turns into a real hell. Here's what happens. The tide pushes water east to west, while the wind blasts the opposite way. The result is broken water, short, steep, chaotic waves that slam into each other from every direction. So does that mean you can't cross the Cook Strait at all? Not exactly. This nasty patch of sea is a bit more complicated than that. For decades, ferries have been running between the islands. They're huge, heavy ships that carry everything. Ordinary tourists, freight, and even entire trains. On the surface, it all looks completely routine. You drive onto the deck, grab a coffee, watch the seagulls, and 3 hours later, you're on the other shore. In New Zealand, this isn't just transport, it's a vital artery that holds the country together. But behind that everyday calm is a problem. The system is far from perfect. The main issue is that the Cook Strait couldn't care less about schedules. In 2025 alone, 43 sailings were canceled because of weather. And that's not some freak anomaly, it's normal. Sometimes people end up waiting for hours or even days, and when they finally get on board, there are no absolute safety guarantees. In 1909, the ferry Penguin was crossing between the North and South Islands when a storm hit. Visibility dropped to 0, and the ship was slammed around by the waves. Penguin sank after striking rocks. More than 70 people died. Then in 1968, the ferry TEV Wahine was wrecked. The ship ran into a powerful storm at the entrance to Wellington Harbor. Wind, heavy seas, and a loss of control did the rest. The vessel grounded and capsized. Dozens of people died. Both disasters had one thing in common. The ships were large, the crews were experienced, and the route was well known. The Cook Strait was still stronger, but that was a long time ago. Today's ferries are more advanced and crews are better trained. So is the Cook Strait safer now? The odds of a tragedy are lower, but it's still risky. In June 2024, the ferry Aratera crashed into the shore near Picton. Everyone survived, but it's hard to call an incident like that normal. Now let's look at this from the other side. If the strait is such a logistical nightmare, why hasn't anyone in the last 100 years just built a bridge? On a map, it looks ridiculously simple. At its narrowest point, it's about 14 miles wide. That's a lot, sure, but there are longer bridges in the world. China builds sea crossings 25 to 31 miles long, and they hold up just fine. So the issue isn't laziness, and it's not even money. The issue is that the Cook Strait is one of the worst places on Earth for a fixed structure. The first problem is the depth. Right at that narrowest point, the seabed can drop to 500 feet or more. And it's not a neat basin with solid bedrock. It's a canyon-cut landscape of loose sediment that's constantly being reshaped by extremely powerful tidal currents. Imagine trying to build on a construction site that moves under your feet. And that's still not the whole story. Now look at this map. New Zealand sits on the boundary between the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates. A whole network of active faults runs straight through the strait, meaning the seabed isn't just unstable, it's literally alive and shifting. Even moderate earthquakes here aren't a, whoa, that was a wobble. They can trigger underwater landslides and reshape the bottom in seconds. What kind of bridge are we even talking about? Picture the bridge piers drilled into the ground that slowly creeps, and then impact. The loads change instantly, the structure gets hit from below with a sudden impulse, and that's it. No bridge. And we haven't even talked about the wind, another deal breaker for any crossing. We've already established that the Cook Strait is basically an aerodynamic funnel. The air doesn't drift there, it races. Storm winds hit regularly, not off to the side, but straight down the axis of the strait. Now imagine a bridge more than 12 miles long built high above the water so ocean-going ships can pass underneath. You'd end up with a gigantic string stretched between two islands. Here's why that matters. Wind doesn't just push, it makes structures sway and vibrate, and if the vibration frequency lines up with the bridge's natural frequency, you get resonance. We already know how that story ends. Take the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, which famously tore itself apart in front of onlookers. But can't you engineer around that? To stop the strait from turning the bridge into a musical instrument, you'd need to make it extremely stiff and heavy. And that brings us right back to the loose soils, the huge depth, the fault lines. Sorry, New Zealand, no bridge for you. So what about other options? What if you just dig a tunnel like under the English Channel and everyone wins? It's protected from wind and it doesn't care about surface currents. Sounds perfect, right? Under the Channel, yes. Between New Zealand's islands, no chance. And that's because a tunnel in an active fault zone is an even more dangerous gamble than building a bridge and sending boats across the strait. With even the slightest shift of the tectonic plates, the tunnel would either flood or be crushed by the surrounding rock. And we have real-world examples showing exactly how that can happen. In September 2022, a roughly 6.6 magnitude earthquake struck China's Sichuan province along an active fault. 3 highway tunnels on the Lunding-Shimian route were seriously damaged. Where they passed through unstable rock, the concrete lining cracked, sections of cladding fell away, and water began seeping inside. And that was on land. Now mentally move that scenario under Cook Strait, where an ocean sits on top and the ground is already in constant motion. Like I said, 0 chance. So no options at all? Well, maybe there's one. It's right on the edge of engineering sci-fi. To understand what it's about, let's head to Norway. They've been talking about an idea that sounds downright bizarre, a tube suspended in the water column. Picture a massive cylinder hanging below the surface held in place by cables and pontoons. Above it, water and passing ships. Inside it, cars driving like nothing's happening. No piles driven into the seabed, no drilling. Now look at where the Norwegians are thinking of installing these things. That's right, there's a fjord. And a fjord is like a huge stone bowl. Mountains shield it from the open ocean, so waves don't really build up and currents are calmer. Deep? Absolutely. But relatively quiet. Now let's go back to the Cook Strait. There's no sheltered bowl there. The sea and the ocean tug the water in opposite directions. The tides clash with each other, and the wind rips through at breakneck speed. In those conditions, a suspended tunnel would behave like a gigantic pendulum. Every gust is a shove, every tide is another attempt to set it swinging. Every wave is a punch from below. Okay, but what if you make it flexible? Let it adapt, move with the water, sway along with it. Sounds reasonable in theory, but in practice, would you drive on a road that has a mind of its own? In the Cook Strait, waves of about 20 to 33 feet are a normal thing. You're at the wheel, and the tunnel under you gently breathes, then starts bobbing up and down, then gets pulled sideways. That's no longer a commute, that's a theme park ride. And for a structure like that to stay stable under relentless wind and wave impacts, you'd need stabilization systems at a near space program level. Dampers, anchors, compensators, everything underwater. In water that never gives you a break. At some point, the bill for this suspended dream starts looking like the budget of a small country. Not exactly an inspiring scene. All right, what if we stop overthinking and just throw money at the problem? Build an ultra-durable bridge no matter what. And that's where the brutal math kicks in. Even by the most conservative estimates, a bridge or tunnel across the Cook Strait would cost $40 to $50 billion. For New Zealand, that's roughly 15 to 20% of GDP. That money would have to come from somewhere. Agriculture, education, healthcare, and other infrastructure would all be squeezed to fund a single crossing. But wouldn't the benefit of uninterrupted freight movement pay it back over time? Nope, the numbers are stubborn. Just the interest on a loan that size could run around $2 billion a year, and that's interest only. That's many times higher than the entire operating profit of the current ferry services. So you end up in a weird situation. Even if the bridge or tunnel exists and trucks and buses use it, financially it's still a black hole. It'd be cheaper to buy brand new, modern ferries every 20 years than to pour tens of billions into concrete and steel once. But wait, I just realized that projects like this work in Japan and Europe. Couldn't a tunnel in New Zealand boost the economy too? Let's zoom in. Japan has 125 million people and a massive domestic market. The UK and France have hundreds of millions of consumers on both sides of the channel. Their flows of people and goods are on a completely different scale. And New Zealand? Just over 1 million people live on the South Island. The whole country has around 5 million. The traffic across the strait simply isn't big enough to justify a mega project. You can't build a multi-billion-dollar highway for a route where, realistically, you'd see 3 trucks full of kiwi fruit and a couple of tourist buses an hour. And even beyond the price tag, neither shoreline is suitable for construction on that scale. Here's the capital, Wellington. Around Wellington, the main routes are ordinary highways. Yes, they connect the city, the port, and the suburbs, but they're not built for a 24/7 stream of heavy trucks hauling concrete, steel, and machinery for years. To even get construction started, you'd first have to rebuild the roads, add lanes, strengthen the pavement, build new interchanges, straighten bends, and create pullouts and staging areas for heavy equipment. In other words, you'd need to build a dedicated transport system for the project before you could even connect it to a bridge or tunnel. Now look at the opposite shore. It gets even trickier. The nearest big towns are tens of miles from the likely construction sites. There's no major port, no vast warehousing, no ready-made industrial zones. To bring materials in, you first need a place to bring them to, and that place simply doesn't exist. So you'd have to build the entire construction base from scratch. Roads to the coastline, storage yards, heavy equipment zones, temporary housing for hundreds, maybe thousands of workers. You'd need a whole small city. In short, there won't be a bridge or a tunnel here. Ferries are delayed all the time, and sometimes they drop out entirely because of breakdowns or storms. So what is New Zealand going to do in this new reality? There is a plan, though honestly it's nothing grand. No project of the century, no attempt to prove you can conquer a strait using concrete. Instead, the government decided to tackle the problem from a different angle, an overhaul of the ferry fleet. At the end of 2025, the new program was officially announced. The country's ordering 2 modern vessels from China, expected to enter service by 2029. Will 2 new ferries eliminate cancellations and delays in this churning maritime washing machine called Cook Strait? Not completely. The strait won't get gentler, but the risks should drop noticeably. Today's issue is simple: wear and tear. The fleet's aging, the machinery's tricky, and repairs follow one after another. Sometimes it feels like the ships spend more time in dry dock than at sea. The new ferries will have stronger, more reliable engines, redundant control systems, and modern stabilization. That means on days when current vessels have to stay at the pier for safety reasons, the new ships will still be able to sail. Not by defying the weather, but by trying to handle its temper. And upgrades around Cook Strait don't stop with the ships. In Picton, construction is already beginning on a new terminal and berths designed to cope with strong tides and gusty winds. In Wellington, they've decided against a massive from-scratch construction and will instead reinforce the existing port, upgrading it to handle larger, more modern vessels. In the end, the country's investing nearly $2 billion, not in a single concrete monument to ambition that would take decades to pay off, but in a system, flexible and upgradable. And here's the key point. For the country, Cook Strait isn't really an obstacle at all. It's something completely unexpected, a source of wealth. But how can one of the most dangerous places help a nation? Wind. People figured out long ago how to turn wind into electricity with turbines. And here in the Strait, as you remember, there's a lot of it. New Zealand makes very active use of that. All around the Strait, there are entire wind farms. Together, they generate over 500 megawatts of capacity. Over a year, they produce roughly 1.7 to 2 terawatt hours of electricity. In plain terms, that's almost half of the country's total wind generation, so the Strait doesn't just rage, it also provides. Okay, so they've tamed the wind, but what about other tricks of the Strait, like tides? They push and pull truly massive volumes of water. Could you just drop in a turbine and make money off it? People tried. In 2008, a private company received official approval to install underwater tidal turbines in the Strait. The plan sounded great. Start with a few 1-megawatt units, then expand into a full park, dozens of turbines, and eventually hundreds of megawatts. A kind of underwater power plant of the future. But the future never arrived. The turbines had to be lowered to depths of around 165 to 260 feet, right where the current tears through the water. And the weather can cut off access to the equipment for weeks at a time. Any repair isn't drive up and tighten a bolt. It's a full-scale offshore operation with vessels, cranes, and rare calm weather windows. And in Cook Strait, calm is a rare visitor. Fine, tides turned out to be too temperamental. What about waves? There are plenty of them here. Why not harness their energy? It's almost the same story as with tidal power. Most wave technologies worldwide are designed for relatively calm coastlines or sheltered bays, places where the swell is predictable and equipment survives longer. In Cook Strait, everything is different. Storm hits, strong currents, and wind all work together. The equipment would need to be not just tough, but practically indestructible. So what's the bottom line? In the end, Cook Strait is so hostile that even energy harvesting devices are hard to deploy, let alone a bridge or a tunnel. That leaves one option: ferries, and the hope that a seasoned crew and a sturdy ship will keep everyone safe.